I wasn't supposed to be in Lisbon. That's the part one keeps circling back to. If the Paris summit hadn't been cancelled, if the rail strike hadn't thrown a wrench in the itinerary, none of it would have happened. Maybe that's the dangerous comfort of hindsight. You start thinking a different flight or a misconnection could have spared you the unraveling of your life. But I was there. I was rerouted. And so was my future. It was a business conference, nothing exciting. Corporate talks, recycled buzzwords, people trying too hard to network over soggy hors d'oeuvres. The hotel, at least, made the whole thing bearable. They booked us into this elegant old place on the edge of the Alfama district, all marble columns and wrought iron balconies. A doorman in a uniform that looked straight out of the 1950s tipped his hat every time you walked in. The place had history. You could feel it in the floorboards. That first night, there was a welcome reception in the ballroom. It had a glass ceiling that let in the last slant of the Lisbon sunset. The kind of orange that glows like it's been brushed on with warm hands. I remember thinking it felt too romantic for a room full of mid-level executives and name tags. I grabbed a drink, something dry and European, I forget what, and stood near the buffet, pretending to check emails. And then I saw her. Julia. I blinked. For a second, I thought I'd mistaken someone else for her, some European version, a woman with the same dark hair, the same posture, the same curve to her mouth when she smiled. But it wasn't someone else. It was her. My wife. She wore a lavender evening dress I'd never seen before, soft and flowing, with silver heels that caught the light when she shifted her weight. Her hair was pulled up, loose strands falling around her neck. She looked stunning. Different. Not like the woman who wore fleece socks around the house or hoarded travel-sized lotions in our bathroom drawers. This was a version of her I didn't know, or maybe one I was never meant to know. She was laughing. Talking to a man. Late 30s, maybe early 40s. Stylish stubble, crisp shirt, no wedding ring. He stood just a little too close. Close enough that if you were passing by, you wouldn't assume anything was wrong. But if you knew her like I did, if you'd watched her pull away from you little by little over the years, you'd notice the way her body leaned toward his. The way their eyes stayed locked like they'd already finished a conversation the rest of us weren't invited to hear. They weren't just chatting. They knew each other. They had a rhythm. A closeness. And then I saw the cards. He held 2 hotel keycards in his hand, loosely gripped, like he wasn't trying to hide them but wasn't showing them off either. Julia reached for one without looking. It was casual, seamless. The kind of gesture that came from practice. I froze. I didn't move. Didn't make a sound. My hands went cold and my drink suddenly tasted like ash. I stood behind a pillar, half-shadowed, praying she wouldn't look my way. My heart thudded in my ears, not like panic, but like betrayal wearing steel-toed boots. They walked toward the elevators. Not hurried. Not sneaky. Just comfortable. She touched his forearm briefly as they waited, and when the doors opened, they stepped inside together. No hesitation. The doors closed. She was gone. I stood there like an idiot for another 10 minutes, maybe longer. People came and went. Small talk continued around me like I wasn't even there. Someone asked if I'd tried the local cheeses. I nodded without answering. My mind was unraveling in slow motion. And then my phone buzzed. A message from Julia. A selfie. She was supposedly in Chicago for a leadership ethics seminar. That was the story. She'd flown out the same morning I did, only heading in the opposite direction. The picture showed her in an airport lounge, clean lines, modern chairs, a coffee cup to her side. She smiled at the camera, her expression just a shade too perfect. Like a face rehearsed in a mirror. The caption read, "Layover hell. Missing you already. Hope Lisbon's nice. Red heart." I stared at it for what felt like hours. The background looked generic, like something you'd see in a stock photo. Too clean, too empty. No other passengers. No terminal signs. Her coffee hadn't even been touched. She wore a sweater I hadn't seen her pack. I zoomed in. The timestamp matched what she'd said. The lighting made sense. The airport aesthetic checked out. But it didn't matter. I knew what I saw. My wife had just stepped into a hotel elevator with another man in Lisbon, and now she was pretending to be in Chicago, sipping lattes and missing me. There was a small part of me that wanted to run after them. To press the elevator button and storm the hallway until I found their room. But I didn't. I couldn't. I just stood there, heart hollowed out, gripping my phone like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. Eventually, I walked outside. The Lisbon air was warm, laced with the smell of grilled fish and the soft murmur of streetcars. I wandered through narrow cobbled streets, my name tag still hanging around my neck like a noose. Locals passed me by, laughing and smoking and living. I wasn't ready to confront her. Not yet. I needed to be sure, to know this wasn't some fever dream. But deep down, I already was. You don't forget the way someone looks at another person when they've forgotten you exist. That night, I lay in my hotel bed, staring at the ceiling fan spin in slow circles. Her message sat unread on my screen. I didn't respond. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same image. Her hand reaching for that keycard. The flash of silver on her heels as the elevator doors slid shut. The way she didn't even glance back. When I got home from Lisbon, everything felt off. It was like walking back into a theater set after the actors had left. Familiar props, same lighting, but no soul behind it. Our house hadn't changed, but I had. And suddenly, I was seeing things that had always been there but never really registered. Julia greeted me at the door like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't been in a different country, stepping into an elevator with someone else. Her hug felt rehearsed, not stiff but placed. Like she'd practiced how tight to hold me, how long to linger. She smelled like her usual perfume, something soft and floral, but underneath it, I swore I caught a different scent. Not cologne exactly, just not mine. I didn't say anything. Not yet. I was still wrapping my head around what I'd seen. I needed to be sure before I opened a door I couldn't close again. The next few days passed slowly. I was watching everything now, not with paranoia, but with the kind of quiet calculation that comes after the first crack in the foundation. I started thinking back, retracing my steps, wondering when exactly things had started to shift. Her phone was the first thing that stood out. She used to leave it everywhere, kitchen counters, bathroom sinks, wedged between couch cushions. I teased her about never charging it. But now, it was never out of her reach. Not once. She brought it into the shower, into the laundry room, to walk the dog. Always face down, notifications silenced. Once, she forgot it in the living room for a whole 5 minutes and came sprinting back like she'd left a child in a hot car. Then there were the yoga classes. At first, I didn't question them. Everyone needs an outlet. She said it helped her focus. That work was stressful and she needed to recenter. But she never showed me photos. Never mentioned classmates or instructors. When I asked where the studio was, her answer was always vague. Oh, it moves around, sometimes in parks, sometimes at that community hall near Maple Street. Except the community hall had been under renovation for months. I checked. Her wardrobe had changed, too. Not drastically, Julia always had style, but there were pieces I'd never seen before. Lingerie tucked in the back of drawers. Receipts for high-end items I knew she hadn't worn around me. She'd started buying travel-sized perfume bottles, dozens of them, as if she needed to smell like a slightly different version of herself every time she stepped on a plane. Her trips had become more frequent, and each one came with a tidy explanation. Leadership summits, regional team-building retreats, women in leadership panels. But whenever I asked about how they went, her answers were shallow. It was fine, she'd say. Tiring. Not much to tell. No stories. No photos with colleagues. No new names. There was one weekend, a random one in October, where she told me she'd be in Seattle. I remember it clearly because I was home with a cold, and she left me a neatly folded blanket and a box of herbal teas on the coffee table before she flew out. Said she'd call when she landed. She did. The call came in that evening. I was half asleep on the couch. She said it was raining, that the hotel had a bad Wi-Fi signal, but she'd try to FaceTime later. Only her gym app betrayed her. The steps recorded that weekend didn't map to Seattle. They pinged near Denver. When I asked about it weeks later, casually jokingly, she said, "Oh, that must have been an old sink. I had a layover there." But her tone changed. Tight. Defensive. She changed the subject before I could press. And just like that, it slipped away. There were other things, too. Things I'd laughed off or explained away. Like how she suddenly hated it when I offered to drive her to the airport. She used to love that. Said it made her feel like we were in a movie. But now she insisted on ride shares. It's just easier, she said. Saves you the trip. And how she grew uncomfortable during conversations at dinner parties, especially if someone joked about cheating or office romances. She'd tense up, then steer the conversation towards safe, sterile topics, property taxes, local elections, dog food brands. Or how she once came home from a conference with a hotel-branded pen in her purse, one from a place I knew I hadn't seen on her itinerary. I asked her about it. She said, oh, they must have given them out at the event. But the hotel was in Rome. I started keeping notes. Not in a creepy, obsessive way, at least, that's what I told myself. Just facts. Just things that didn't add up. Screensh *TS of texts with timestamps, duplicate calendar invites, odd travel receipts. I found a charge from a spa in Vancouver dated the same day she claimed to be in New York. When I brought it up, she said her card must have been cloned. I pretended to believe her. I began double-checking flight numbers she gave me, looking up hotel floor plans. Not because I wanted to catch her, but because deep down I already had. I just needed to build the case. For myself. For my own sanity. Because the gaslighting wasn't always loud or obvious. It was small. Measured. Quiet enough that I almost believed her. That's the thing with slow betrayals, they don't hit you like a crash. They bleed into your life like a leaky faucet until you wake up one day and realize you've been soaked for years. I found old emails she'd deleted but hadn't cleared from the trash. A thank you note from a man named Kyle. Last weekend was exactly what I needed, it read. I'll never forget the view from that balcony or you in that robe. No attachments, no full names. Just enough to send my stomach into a tailspin. Kyle? A name. A crack in the wall. I still hadn't confronted her. I was waiting. Waiting for the moment when I could look her in the eye and ask without flinching. But the longer I waited, the more the silence started rotting from the inside. I began waking up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, convinced I'd heard her whispering to someone in the hallway. I'd rush out heart pounding, only to find the house still and silent. She kept acting normal. Maybe a little more distracted. But not guilty. That's what threw me. She never once seemed afraid I might find out. Almost like she was sure I wouldn't. And that's what made it worse. It wasn't the cheating itself that broke me. It was the ease with which she lied. The casual cruelty of it. The performance. She was rehearsed. Perfectly. Like someone who'd practiced deception the same way a musician practices scales again and again until the notes become muscle memory. It happened on a Wednesday. A rainy, gray-skied kind of day that didn't feel like it wanted to be anything at all. I left work early with a dull ache pulsing behind my eyes, one of those migraines that doesn't scream but wears you down with a slow, rhythmic thud. Julia had said she'd be working late. Budget reviews or some kind of quarterly meeting, I forget the details. I barely listened anymore when she explained her schedule. The words always sounded rehearsed. I wasn't planning to catch her. I wasn't trying to play detective. I just wanted to crawl into bed and bury my face under the covers. But when I pulled into the driveway and saw her car already parked there well before she was supposed to be home, something shifted in me. I sat in the car for a moment, listening to the soft patter of rain on the windshield. My hands stayed on the steering wheel. I wasn't ready, but I got out anyway. The front porch creaked beneath my shoes, same as always. But the sound felt louder now. Too loud. Like the house itself was holding its breath. I unlocked the door. The living room lights were off. No music, no television. Just silence. The kind that hums in your ears and makes your chest tighten. Then I noticed the smell. Cologne. Not just a whiff, but a cloud of it. Expensive, musky, foreign. Definitely not mine. It clung to the air like smoke after a candle's been snuffed out. I followed the scent through the hallway. That's when I saw them, a pair of men's boots sitting neatly by the front door. Large, worn, but clearly well-maintained. I didn't recognize them. And there was no logical reason for them to be there. The pit in my stomach turned into something heavier. Like gravity had doubled in the span of a heartbeat. The house felt staged. Lived in, but not by me. Her purse was lying on the floor in the hallway like it had been dropped in a hurry. A wine bottle stood half-empty on the dresser near the bedroom next to two glasses, both stained with lipstick. One of them had a faint smudge of something dark on the rim. Maybe eyeliner. Maybe hers. The door to our bedroom was open. I walked slowly. Not because I was trying to be quiet, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to see what was waiting for me on the other side. Some part of me still hoped I was wrong. That all of it, the elevator in Lisbon, the mystery scent, the deleted messages, was just a pile of misread signs. She was sitting on the edge of the bed. Not startled. Not surprised. Just adjusting her hair in the mirror, smoothing the sides like she had somewhere to be. She was still in a silk robe, deep navy blue, the kind she never wore to sleep. The fabric caught the light as she shifted. Her face was flushed, but her expression was blank. Unbothered. She looked at me like I was the one who didn't belong there. There was a laptop open on the nightstand. I glanced at it without saying a word. My body moved on its own. I walked over and looked at the screen. An email thread. The subject line, "The weekend was magic." It was open mid-conversation. No password. No attempt to hide it. The most recent message was dated 4 days earlier. Kyle, I can't stop thinking about the way you looked on that balcony. That robe should be illegal. You said it'd be our last time, but I'm not ready to let go. I keep checking flights like an idiot. Tell me you miss me too. Below it were older messages. Weeks of them. Julia, I miss your hands on my back. I miss waking up to the sound of your laugh. Let's not talk about the end yet. Let's just talk about next time. Kyle, that photo you sent, I saved it. You're glowing. Like something out of a painting. Julia, that robe? It's actually yours now. I brought it home. A little piece of Rome. I looked up. Sure enough, hanging from the back of our bathroom door was the very same robe. Navy silk. The belt tied in a casual knot. I suddenly remembered her pulling it out of her luggage 2 weeks ago, calling it a hotel freebie. I hadn't thought much of it then. But now? It felt radioactive. The messages went back even further. There were references to past trips: Chicago, Denver, San Diego. All cities she'd claimed to be visiting for work. She'd said those trips were draining. Corporate theater, she called them. Everyone pretending to care. But clearly, someone had cared. Deeply. Kyle wasn't new. He wasn't a fling. He was part of a rhythm. Part of her real life, the one she'd kept hidden behind delayed flights and vague agendas. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I didn't say anything, actually. I just stood there, reading the words on the screen until they burned themselves into my memory. She didn't try to stop me. Didn't grab the laptop or shut the lid or offer an explanation. She just sat there, brushing her hair behind one ear like it was any other Wednesday. And maybe for her it was. Eventually, I walked out of the room. My legs were numb, my hands shaking, but not from rage. From clarity. All the puzzle pieces had clicked into place. The clues I'd gathered weren't speculation anymore. They were proof. Hard and undeniable. I walked down the hallway, past the wine glasses, past the unfamiliar boots, and sat on the living room couch. The rain kept falling outside. I listened to it against the window, counting the seconds between drops like a metronome. Time felt suspended. A minute passed. Maybe 5. And then she walked down the hallway, not saying a word, and out the front door. No excuse. No lie. No plea. Just silence. Later that night, I scrolled back through the email thread. There were photos embedded, grainy selfies of hotel rooms, balcony views, close-up *TS of room service breakfasts for 2. One image stopped me cold, Julia, in that same robe, sitting on a terrace in Rome, her head tilted back in laughter. A man's hand rested on her bare knee. You could only see his wristwatch and the edge of his sleeve. The timestamp was from the same weekend she'd sent me a picture of a foggy Chicago skyline and told me she was too tired to FaceTime. I forwarded the email thread to myself. Then I closed the laptop and walked into our bedroom. The sheets were rumpled. The air still heavy. I stripped the bed, took the robe off the door, and shoved it into a trash bag. It felt symbolic. Small, maybe, but necessary. She didn't come back that night. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the couch with the TV on mute, watching shadows move across the floor, waiting for the numbness to wear off. It didn't. There were no fireworks. No shouting matches. No sobbing on the kitchen floor or melodramatic exits in the rain. That's not how it went. After I found the emails, the photos, the robe, after the pieces of the truth all laid themselves out in perfect, gutting symmetry, I expected some kind of collapse. A confrontation. I'd imagined it 100 ways. Julia crying, denying, spinning stories. Me yelling, breaking something, demanding explanations. But none of that happened. Instead, I woke up the next morning to an empty bed. No text. No note. No apology. She came home in the afternoon, hours after I'd been up cleaning the bedroom, bagging every item that felt tainted. I'd stripped the bed, thrown out the wine glasses, boxed up the robe along with a few others I suddenly didn't recognize. There were earrings on the nightstand, not her usual style. Sleek, gold, definitely new. I put those in the box too. When she walked through the door, she didn't say a word. No tension in her shoulders. No shame in her eyes. She looked at me like someone returning from a day at the grocery store. Like nothing had changed. I didn't speak either. I just walked past her to the basement and returned with 2 large storage boxes. She watched me for a moment and then, without asking why, went upstairs. I didn't hear her again for nearly an hour. While she was gone, I started packing. I didn't rush. I took my time, moving through the house with a kind of eerie calm. I gathered her framed photos from the hallway, her bookshelf favorites, her drawer full of charging cables and random chargers. One by one, her life went into neat piles. Her side of the bathroom, her coats in the hall closet, her sentimental junk drawer full of birthday cards and expired coupons. All of it. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't even anger. It was survival. There was a weight I couldn't carry anymore, and it came attached to everything she touched. By the time the sun started to fade, I'd filled 2.5 boxes. I placed them in the garage near the back wall. Then I changed the locks. I did it that night before I could talk myself out of it. I didn't want a confrontation later. I didn't want a midnight argument or a slurred confession after 3 glasses of wine. I wanted control. Not over her, over my space. Over my own peace. Julia didn't try to stop me. She didn't ask what I was doing. She didn't accuse me of overreacting or beg for forgiveness. She said nothing. That was the strangest part. The silence wasn't empty, it was loaded. Dense. It hung in the air between us like humidity before a thunderstorm, except the storm never came. There was just nothing. She drifted through the house like a guest overstaying her welcome. She didn't protest when I cleared her things from the bathroom counter. She didn't flinch when I took our wedding photo off the wall. She didn't even look surprised when I stopped making dinner for 2. The nights were the worst. I'd lie in bed, listening for signs that she might say something, a door creaking, the click of her heels on the floor, a cough in the hallway. Anything. But there was no attempt to bridge the gap. She started sleeping in the guest room. I never invited her there. She never asked. We coexisted like ghosts. Walking through the same rooms, breathing the same air, but never meeting eyes. Our words, when we spoke at all, were transactional. Have you seen the charger? The dog needs food. There's mail on the counter. Once, I stood behind her at the sink while she washed a mug. I wanted to say something. Ask her why. Ask her how long it had really been going on. Ask if she even felt sorry. But the words felt ridiculous. What was the point of asking questions when you already knew the answers? She wouldn't admit it. Or if she did, it wouldn't make anything hurt less. And so we stayed silent. I caught myself talking to the dog more than to her. At least he looked me in the eye. At least he didn't pretend nothing had happened. A few nights later, I came home to find the guest room door closed and music playing softly behind it. Some lo-fi playlist, mellow and repetitive. I stood outside for a moment, not knocking, not eavesdropping. Just standing. On the other side of that door was a woman I'd shared a decade of my life with. And now I didn't even know what to say to her. How does that happen? How do you build a life with someone, vacations, bills, holidays, inside jokes, and then one day it all becomes unrecognizable? It's not the fights that ruin you. It's the quiet, the slow dissolve. That's what got to me. Not her lies. Not Kyle, or the emails, or the robe from Rome. It was the silence after. The absence of regret. The emotional vacuum. She never once said she was sorry. Never looked at me with guilt or even discomfort. If anything, she seemed relieved, like a secret had slipped loose and she no longer had to keep up the act. I started wondering if she'd wanted to be caught. If maybe, in some twisted way, this was her escape plan all along. One morning, I made coffee and found her standing at the window, arms crossed, staring out at the street. She didn't turn around when I entered the room. Didn't flinch when I said good morning. She simply said, "Do you want me to move out today?" Her voice was calm. Not bitter. Not sad. Yes, I said. She nodded. That was it. That evening, she packed what remained of her clothes and filled her car in 3 trips. No friends came to help her. No moving truck. Just her, loading box after box into the trunk like it was just another errand. She didn't cry. She didn't stall. Before she left, she walked through each room slowly, pausing here and there like someone checking a hotel suite before checkout. She didn't take anything she hadn't brought in. She left the old records we used to play on Sundays. Left the throw blanket her mother gave us for Christmas. Left the mug she always used on rainy mornings, the one with the cracked handle I'd glued back together twice. When she reached the door, she turned to look at me. Not with apology. Just a nod. Small. Respectful. Final. Then she walked out. Closed the door gently behind her. And just like that, the silence finally settled in completely. No movement. No trace. No more pretending. Only me. Alone in the house we built together, surrounded by echoes that no longer belonged to anyone. After she left, I told myself I'd stop digging. What was the point? The marriage was over. The truth, or at least enough of it, had come out. She cheated. She lied. She moved on. But the thing about betrayal is, it doesn't just cut. It echoes. It loops through your brain, clawing at the walls, asking over and over, what else? So I kept going. I didn't plan it. I wasn't some obsessed ex-husband losing sleep over imaginary details. At least, that's what I told myself. I just couldn't stop asking questions. Couldn't stop wondering how deep the rot went. It started with the cloud storage. We'd shared access to a folder, just boring adult stuff. Bills, tax documents, receipts. I hadn't checked it in ages. But one night I opened it out of reflex, scrolling through PDFs and spreadsheets. And there it was. A folder she forgot to remove. Titled simply, Work Trips. Inside were itineraries, boarding passes, confirmations. Years worth. I opened one labeled Nashville_leadership_retreat_2023. The hotel confirmation was for a resort just outside the city. But it was booked for 2. The receipt showed 2 entrees at the spa bistro. A couple's massage. And when I clicked the photo thumbnails embedded at the bottom, my chest tightened. There she was. Julia. In sunglasses and a sundress I didn't recognize, sitting at a poolside bar with a man I'd never seen. His arm draped casually over the back of her chair. Both of them laughing. Not posing. Not staged. Real. Candid. In asterisk mate. That same night, I found another email thread, this one with someone named Carter. Different man. Different city. Same pattern. Their conversation was lighter, full of inside jokes and winks. Carter was younger, judging by his photo, boyish face, sharp jawline. He worked in marketing, apparently. Called her Jules. Said things like, can't wait to sneak away again. I traced the dates. They overlapped with the time she said she was in Boston for a finance summit. The night she sent me a text about missing our dog and wishing I was home already, she had actually been photographed at a rooftop bar, smiling up at Carter, champagne in hand. Then came Milo. That one hit harder, somehow. Maybe because his emails were more romantic. Less flirtation, more affection. He wrote about dreams. About wanting a future. About how you make the world quieter, Jules. One message was titled, Our Sunday Morning. He described waking up beside her, her hair on his chest, her breath warm on his neck. I knew that rhythm. Those words. That scene. It was ours. At least, it used to be. But now I wasn't sure any of it had ever been mine. Each name I uncovered came with its own stack of receipts, messages, and *TS. Sometimes they overlapped. Sometimes they didn't. But together, they told a story far more intricate than a single affair. This wasn't a moment of weakness. This was a structure. A system. A life built beside mine, operating quietly behind conference calls and business dinners and yoga retreats. She hadn't lost control. She had planned everything. Orchestrated it. Compartmentalized each version of herself with chilling precision. It was the worst kind of betrayal, not chaotic and accidental, but methodical. She hadn't stumbled. She'd strategized. I began cross-referencing locations. Google timeline histories. Transaction records. I created a spreadsheet, not because I wanted to trap her, but because I couldn't believe the scope of it. Over the course of 4 years, Julia had maintained relationships with at least 3 different men, possibly more. Each connection carried just enough distance, just enough plausibility. She never got sloppy. She lied with consistency. Her calendars were forged. Her stories airtight. She had told me once that she admired strong architecture, things that looked effortless but took complex engineering beneath the surface. Now I saw that's exactly what she had created. A life that could bear the weight of multiple truths. Only none of them were true. I looked back on our anniversaries. I remembered one in particular, the year we went to Sedona. She'd been distracted the whole trip. I thought it was work stress. She even apologized, said she'd make it up to me. That same week, she'd sent Milo a photo of the view from our cabin's balcony, claiming it was her sister's timeshare and that she was on a solo reset. I kept finding more. More proof. More lies. More versions of her that I had never met. I tried to remember the last time we'd made love when it felt real. Not routine. Not forced. Not performed. But the memories were slippery now. I questioned everything. Was she thinking of one of them? Was I just filler? A placeholder husband while she wrote parallel chapters with other men? I remembered asking her once years ago if she believed people could love 2 people at the same time. She had paused, thoughtful, and said, not in the same way. At the time, I thought it was philosophical. Now, I wondered if it was a confession in disguise. And yet, through it all, I never found what I was really looking for. I never found guilt. There was no apology hidden in the drafts folder. No deleted note where she admitted to being overwhelmed, or sorry, or confused. No journal entry where she tried to explain herself. She'd left no trace of regret. Just messages signed with hearts and hotel bookings for 2. I'd always imagined infidelity as something messy, as something tangled in guilt and indecision. But this was polished, efficient, corporate almost. Like she ran her affairs the same way she ran her project meetings on time, on budget, without emotion. What crushed me wasn't the cheating. It was how easily she had made me feel crazy for suspecting it. Every time I'd hesitated to ask questions, every time I'd ignored a red flag or second-guessed my instincts, she had benefited from it. She *p***nized my trust, not just to hide things, but to control the narrative. I thought back to nights I'd sat alone in our kitchen, eating reheated leftovers while she worked late. I remembered the way she'd sigh when I asked too many questions, how she'd frame me as paranoid if I looked at her phone screen too long. I realized now that my silence had been her security system. She didn't just lie to me. She trained me not to look. I started seeing myself in a different light, not as a victim exactly, but as someone who had willingly ignored his own intuition for the sake of comfort, for the illusion of safety. I wanted so badly for things to be normal, for her to love me the way she said she did, that I built my own blindfold. And even after everything, the emails, the photos, the overlapping timelines, I still didn't hate her. That's what broke me the most. I hated what she did. I hated the betrayal. I hated how she'd rewritten our marriage like it was just one of many projects she'd quietly exited. But I didn't hate her. I just couldn't recognize her anymore. The woman I loved, the one I thought I knew, had vanished somewhere between business class flights and midnight text messages. And in her place stood a stranger with my wife's face, my wife's voice, my wife's scent. I didn't want revenge. I didn't even want answers. I just wanted out. Out of the web. Out of the fog. Out of the life I'd built on borrowed trust. I was done keeping the lights on in a house that had long since gone cold. Weeks passed. I stayed off social media, trying to rebuild something resembling a life. Then one day, a friend texted, "Thinking of you. Stay strong." Confused, I checked Julia's profile. There she was, hand in hand with a new man at a rooftop bar, captioned, "Free to breathe again." The comments applauded her courage and healing. She painted herself as the survivor, vague references to escaping manipulation, as if our marriage had been her cage. There was no mention of Kyle, Carter, or Milo. No trace of what she'd done. She'd rewritten the story completely, starring as the hero in a fiction where I was the villain. But I didn't comment. I didn't explain. I no longer needed to defend myself against her fantasy. The truth didn't need an audience, only peace. The divorce was clean. No drama, no resistance. Julia signed everything without emotion. Then came a call, Justin. Another man she'd dated, believing she was recently divorced. He found my email through an old invoice she'd forgotten to hide. Then came another message, this time from someone named Eric. Same story. Same lies. 3 affairs at least. All running parallel. I didn't rage. I didn't retaliate. I donated our sheets, repainted the bedroom, deleted the digital memories. And then at a small charity event in Seattle, I met Jane. No games, no performances. Just honest laughter over street food and rain. I wasn't rebuilding from wreckage anymore. I was simply walking away from the illusion she built and stepping quietly back into my own life.